Hi, everybody. My name is Jared Milrad. I'm the founder of Movie Karma, with a nonprofit organization that created our podcast, Rewriting Hollywood, focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and social impact in Hollywood, looking at the power of storytelling and how it can be harnessed for social change and social good. Really excited to have two very special guests joining us today. Their latest project is called First Step. And it's really moving a documentary that I hope folks will check out. Our guests today are the director of the project, Brandon Kramer, as well as the producer, Lance Kramer, the Kramer brothers, as they're known as well. This project looks at the media personality and change maker Van Jones, who you may have seen through his work on CNN and the Obama White House and many other places, as he attempts to bring people together to pass a landmark criminal justice bill and prison reform called the First Step Act, which was passed a few years ago during the Trump years. And we see Van, finding himself under fire from all sides. And this film really gives us kind of an intimate portrait of his journey as an activist, his internal struggles, and really how he tries to make change in a divided world and a divided nation. So Brandon, Lance, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Really glad to be here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't have too much time, so I want to dive right in. Tell us a little bit, if you would, both of you, just about your journey and your background. I had a chance to take a look and learn more about each of you. It sounds like you've been doing some incredible projects. But for our listeners, tell us kind of how did you find your way into documentary filmmaking? Maybe let's see, Brandon, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I got lucky in that I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker since I was a little kid. Lance and I were making films when we were children together. I also got lucky in that I had a brother that also wanted to become a filmmaker. And so we've got, now 30 plus years of experience telling stories together. And, I think we grew up in the DC area. We've lived in DC for most of our adult life. And Lance and I have always just been really fascinated by the human struggle and journey of trying to create change in this country, and specifically about what it takes to actually pass bills and create policy that impacts people's lives, not just from an informational basis, but just really what is the emotional stakes, what does it look like for human beings to advocate for change, and what is the human narrative of how those bills become law and actually impact people's lives. And then vice versa with our first film, City of Trees, we were really interested in the impact that policy has on people's lives. So that first film really dives into the stories of people impacted by policy. This film that we're about to release, The First Step, is really about the behind the scenes fight to create policy.
Yeah, it's a really powerful film. Lance, I want to turn it to you. Before I do, though, just to add to that, I saw you both were fourth generation Washingtonians, I believe. So definitely it seems like these are types of issues running in your blood. Lance, tell us a little bit about your journey and what do you see as your role through I understand Meridian Hill Pictures, which is this sort of shop you've opened up to do these types of projects.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's funny. We're fourth generation Washingtonians. Our family does not work in politics. So our great grandfather was a butcher. Our grandfather was a butcher. Our dad is a sculptor. Mom is a teacher. So we grew up in DC, but not, at least in our household, in like a political DC in the maybe way that some people think like everyone is working in the company town.
Right.
So I think that background also is really critical for us, particularly in the sense that, we had parents who were artists and educators. And so that's a lot of what informs how we developed our own filmmaking practice. In terms of my role specifically as a producer, if that's, maybe what you're asking, we've worked everything we've made independently. So that's meant that, from the time we've had the first insight or idea or question or line of inquiry around what is a film going to be, then you basically have to build the whole thing from scratch each and every time. So to do that requires everything from figuring out where you're going to work, to what cameras you're going to use and buy, to getting insurance, to having a lawyer to hiring all these people to getting access to film in all these spaces to booking travel to building relationships with funders and people who might distribute your film and film festivals, all that stuff you have to come up with like on your own and build a team and a process, a set of processes around. And there's like books, but there aren't great roadmaps that you can exactly follow.
Right.
So I feel like a lot of that is just what I wound up doing as a producer, and then trying to always make decisions that that are in alignment with the story that we're telling. And it's it's very hard to do that, but it's been really a great insight to realize that that's a skill set that I gravitate towards, and Brandon has gravitated towards directing, and so it's meant for a really great partnership also between the two of us, because we don't really step on each other's toes too much.
Yeah, that's really neat that you guys found your lanes essentially, and definitely producers' work is yeoman's work. I'm sure a lot of indie filmmakers, and I know myself from having made a couple on the short film side, how difficult those are. But I can't even imagine when you're dealing with a documentary, as you guys have many times, but it's particularly this one of this complexity, how challenging that could be. I want to dive into that in terms of how this project, Brandon, I'll go back to you, how the first step this project came to be, and what also like interested each of you in this particular topic, and Van Jones specifically.
Yeah, we had a relationship with Van for several years before we started this project. We were, involved in a few other projects together. And essentially, after Trump was elected, Van, Lance, and I sat down and had a conversation. And Van, we were like, Trump's now president. What are you as a public figure, as a leading criminal justice advocate, what are you planning to do in this moment? And he basically said, look, a lot of my peers, a lot of people who are leaders in the criminal justice fight and in the progressive movement are going to be fighting this administration and resisting and doing really important advocacy work to try to prevent and mitigate the damage that they're going to have. Van felt that he needed to be one of the few people that would reach across the aisle, walk in the doors of that building with Trump in power, and find out, is there some common ground that can be done and can be accomplished? And as filmmakers, Lance and I are really drawn to stories that particularly involve leaders and advocates that are working against the grain, that are attempting something really controversial. And we're just also fascinated by coalitions and the messiness involved in building coalitions. And so we felt like no matter where Van's journey went, it would be a really important historical document to share with the public, and very instructive to what bridge building could look like moving forward. At that point in time, Van didn't know Jared Kushner. The First Step Back bill did not exist. He just had an idea of engagement. And we felt like it was going to be a hard, tough, sometimes perilous road to doing anything across the aisle in that moment in time. And we felt like it would be critical to document it and share it and have an audience that could learn from it.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating portrait, and I think a really, as you said, a really important historical portrait. Van is obviously no stranger to some of this advocacy work, as you said, doing it many years, both on the front lines that we see in the film of, out here in California, organizing around prison reform for so many years. He's been in the fight. But Lance, what attracted you to this? And as you started working with Van or talking about the project, like, what challenges did you see that could come up? I mean, obviously, it was certainly possible that this bill would never become law, and this entire film would be kind of have a different ending to it.
There's so many challenges in making this film. We could fill a podcast far longer than 20 minutes.
Yeah.
As Brandon said, at the onset of making the film, there was no bill. You know, Van and Jared didn't know each other, so there was just this bigger question about if you're setting out even abstractly to go on this mission to work across these divisions and try to get something accomplished, what does that actually look like? Like, what's the day-to-day of that? Like, who are the cast of players? And what are the moments? What are the scenes? Like, what are the conversations? What actually happens? What's the arc? Is that interesting, or is it just going to be a bunch of meetings? Right. And who's going to go watch a movie of meetings? You know, so we were dealing with, or speeches, and so we were dealing with a lot of things like that were just in a lot of cases, those are these storytelling questions about, like, how could this actually, yeah, it sounds intriguing or really important, but what is that actually, how does that actually take shape in a film that would captivate someone's interest without forcing it to be, you know, amped up into something more? Because unfortunately that happens too, especially with some docs, and our radar was up really sensitively towards not doing that. We try really hard not to create fake stakes and represent things as they are. Right. So that was very challenging. And then just building the relationships and the access. And the film, we filmed in the Trump White House. We filmed in the heart of coal country, West Virginia, the heart of South Los Angeles. These are places that, for any filmmaker, especially for us, were not easy places to walk in the front door of. And so to get to a point where we had relationships and trust, where we could be there with the blessing of people, was just hands down, I think, the hardest thing. Raising the money and also just putting the kind of infrastructure in place was extremely challenging. But I actually think that just building the relationships and living up to the relationships was still the hardest thing.
Yeah, and I guess a quick follow-up to that, Lance, how did you end up getting access to some of these places? I mean, if you can share any illuminations on that, like, especially with, you know, a place like the Trump White House, which I can only imagine was not exactly thrilled maybe about some of the things that you wanted to do.
I mean, you'd be surprised. We're not gotcha journalists. We're not gotcha filmmakers. We don't have hidden cameras. Right. This is our whole MO is we're very transparent. We're very direct about who we are, what we're trying to do. And we were always really clear about our intentions, whether it was walking into the sheriff's office in McDowell County, West Virginia, or talking to the White House counsel, you know, in the Trump administration about who we were and what we wanted to do. And people always had questions, but I will give everyone a lot of credit, from the people in West Virginia, the people in LA, to the White House, in the sense that people let us in, not always for everything, you know, so we couldn't just wander around, you know, any of these spaces forever, but people did let us in. And a lot of times it was because there was trust that was already built amongst the people who were protagonists in the film, who were the frontline advocates for the bill. And if there was trust with them and then they trusted us, we were able to, in a sense, almost piggyback off that trust. And so in this case in particular, when you talk about the White House, because Van and Jared and Jessica and Lewis had this relationship, and Van and team could vouch for us, that was a big, that was critical in order to be able to have the trust to get into the White House. And we were very clear too that this was not something where the White House could have any sort of prior review. So if we were going to film in the White House, we had to be able to do that independently without any sort of, you know, censorship or anything like that.
Yeah, really fascinating. There, for the folks who haven't seen the film, obviously you're referring to the Cut 50 Van's team, essentially, which seem to have some relationships through his organization. Brandon, I want to go to you. I mean, a lot to cover here in terms of the topics and themes, obviously, in the film. But if you could talk a little bit about just Van himself and just this, as we see in the film, I mean, I got a sense as a viewer that, you know, this guy just can't win, kind of. I mean, he's just, you kind of do feel for him, I think, as a viewer in a lot of ways. I don't know if that was your intention, but certainly you get a sense of his struggles as he tries to kind of maybe do something good, but then folks on the left say, well, you shouldn't even engage with this administration at all. Like perfect, sort of the enemy of the good. Like, talk about some of that, if you would, in terms of who Van is and some of the challenges and struggles he faced as he tried to do what he felt was the right thing.
Yeah, Bishop T.D. Jakes says in the film to Van at a moment that is a real low for him, when you stand in the middle of the road, you get hit on both sides. And that's what I was witnessing. It was not a popular decision to go into the Trump White House and build that relationship. Van is somebody who is extremely strategic. And, when I walked into one of his first homes in DC, he had posters on the wall, Michael Jordan, Nelson Mandela. He really looks up, Prince. He really looks up to these leaders who are extremely effective at what they do. And Van's mission is squarely on, helping people who are incarcerated come home from prison. And he, you could spend a whole, you could spend an hour psychoanalyzing like who he is and why he came up. He was bullied as a kid. That's in the film. He talks about it. He's not afraid of being alienated and isolated, especially if it means the result of that is him accomplishing his mission. And he's been attacked on both sides of the aisle so many times before. You got to remember, when he was in the Obama White House, it was the right wing that was coming after him and caused him to get ousted from that White House. He's no stranger to controversy. And that makes him a very unique public advocate, because to be a bridge builder in this moment in time, you have to be extremely resilient and be willing to take the hits on all sides. And that's the kind of leader Van is. It's an extremely isolating experience. And you see in the film, the end of the film, thousands of people are coming home from prison. Van is also, fairly isolated at the end of the film. He's having really tough conversations with advocates on the left, even after the bill passed and tens of thousands of people came home. That was a really important decision for us as filmmakers. There were some people who were telling us, oh, just, make an ending to the film that shows the people coming home from prison, happy ending, bill passed. That's not the reality. The reality is there's a contradiction here. That almost 75,000 people have been released from prison and they're back with their families. That's a huge thing. And Van, Louis, Jessica, others there's real relationships that have been strained, and in some cases fractured as a result of that. And that's the outcome of the film. And we want audiences to sit with some of the discomfort in that ending, because that's real life.
Yeah, very real for sure. And I thought that was really powerful, how it did feel very nuanced and honest, and showed the risks that he took and the others took to do this work, including a lot of the community that we see in the film. A lot of the community folks and organizers also were facing real challenges there too, right? To decide whether they wanted to go to the White House at all or be part of this effort. Yeah,
for somebody like Tylo James from South Central Los Angeles, whose brother is serving a triple-digit sentence in prison. She's been on the front lines fighting the addiction crisis in her community. For her to step foot and have a conversation with Kellyanne Conway takes an enormous act of courage. And and for somebody like Doug Copenhaver, who is a Republican elected official in the state of West Virginia, to travel with Van Jones, who all of his friends are telling him, or some of his friends at least are telling him, is the enemy, And for him to travel with van to South Central LA, where people, might be thinking, oh, there's all this crime in LA, it's the inner city. For him to do that and build relationships and build empathy, all these people took enormous leaps of faith and courage in their advocacy to step into uncomfortable spaces. And in many ways, I just wanted the film to honor the courage and the risks that they took.
Yeah, beautifully said. I want Lance to give you a chance to respond to that a few minutes we have. Why was it important for folks who haven't seen the film to show, that cross-pollination, if you will, those relationships? I mean, there's incredible conversations between these organizers and the opioid crisis in West Virginia, and then folks, as you said, Brandon in South Central LA, all the way to the Trump White House through Van. I mean, it's just, there's so many, you said, Brandon, kind of acts of courage and folks who kind of literally jumping across lines, essentially political lines, cultural lines, racial lines. Talk about that, Lance, if you would. Why do you feel like that was important to show, and what you took from a lot of those moments?
It moved us when we saw it happen before our eyes in ways that honestly I think about every day, and not just because I'm working on the film, but it sits with me. It's changed me. And we could feel that when we were in the room, that something almost transcendent was happening. A lot of the people also who are in the film are spiritual people or people of faith. And so that quality or that dimension of just the human experience is very present too, even beyond denomination, but just on a kind of a core level. And so to just experience that kind of connection and transcendent relationship building, especially across those kinds of divides that you were mentioning in this moment, is something that I wish wasn't so rare. Unfortunately, it is. Yeah. So to then see that and have it before your eyes on camera, on film, or digitally, we felt a tremendous responsibility to tell the story well and then get it out there, because if it could even just touch one person, let alone however many thousands have seen the film, then I think that there's a ton of power in that. And so that kind of responsibility has driven us this whole time, especially then when that's been reinforced by people who have seen the film, particularly when we've gone around the country to these 30 plus states and had people who have been formerly incarcerated watch the movie and tell us how they've responded to the film, and then want to use the film to organize and work towards additional state reforms and all these kinds of things. When you start hearing that kind of feedback, it's very hard to just put the film on the shelf and say, okay, we're done, move on to the next thing. And that's really been fueling us. And I hope when people see the film, it'll move them in a similar way.
Yeah, and on that note, just to echo what Lance is saying, the film is coming out in theaters in a week in New York, LA, DC, and 20 other states. And all of those screenings are being done in partnership with these criminal justice reform advocacy groups. So every screening is presented with these organizers who are working on passing state and local and federal legislation to advance this issue. And so anyone who's listening, if you are interested in seeing the film in theaters and being a part of one of these experiences, firststepfilm.com has a list of all the theatrical screenings. And then in about a month or so, the film will come out streaming as well. So if you can't see it in theaters, you can watch it online as well.
Yeah, that's great. I was glad you mentioned that. I guess quickly, I hope folks will see it. It's a really powerful film. My final question, I guess, is up to you, Brandon, the last word of just on that note, what do you think, what do you want folks, if anything, to take from this in terms of, I'm sure everyone will take something slightly different, but, I was just struck by, it almost felt like there's just there's no right answer in terms of how one, wants to be an advocate, right? I mean, as Van says, I think himself, and he said earlier, he seemed to feel like he really needed to be the one to kind of, as you said, kind of be in the middle, straddle both sides. But then there are folks on the left who seem just as, it's true to their values and just saying, I want to be in the other side. So I guess what do you feel like audiences should think about or take from this, if anything, in terms of how we can bridge some of those divides and hopefully make some progress on an issue like this that a lot of us do care about?
I hope the film takes some of the cynicism out of people's hearts. I got to be honest, when I started making this film, even coming from the DC area, I thought nothing was possible in Washington and that the divisions in this country were so pervasive that you couldn't work through them. I got to see up close, in person, in the rooms, a group of people who disagree on 99 things, find some common ground, debate, experience backlash in their communities for engaging and debating and discussing. Those ideas from those discussions that happened in those rooms made their way onto a piece of paper that is called a bill. That bill was voted on in the Senate and the House by a huge bipartisan majority, passing both places, and then signed into law by the toughest law and order Republican you could imagine, that you could never have imagined would sign a criminal justice reform bill. And then tens of thousands of people come home to their families. That gave me a lot of hope that there actually is something possible when not you agree to, I'm not, the film, they weren't looking, and the film isn't looking to have Republicans become Democrats, Democrats become Republicans. It's not going to happen. What it does show you is that when you get away from some of the broad strokes of just labeling the other side, and you get into the nuances of what do they actually believe in? What matters to them? There's actually typically more common ground than you can see. And so my hope is that by telling a story that has people in the film that can resonate and appeal to a very broad and diverse audience, that it inspires people to, whether that is at the Thanksgiving table with their aunts or uncles, whether it's in a PTA meeting or a state legislature, find some room to build a relationship with somebody you disagree with and actually dive into the nuances. If Van Jones and Louis Reed can do that with Donald Trump and Jared Kushner, everybody should be able to do that with somebody in their life.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I hope folks take that to heart. It's a urgently needed message, I would argue, now more than ever. So I'm so glad you all did this project. Congratulations on, I know how hard I imagine it was to get this made and get this released. Again, it's the film is called The First Step. It's a really powerful look at criminal justice reform and prison reform and the passage of the First Step Act. You can watch it as was mentioned in cities throughout February, and also in March it'll be on streaming as well. Brandon, Lance, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you
so much for having us. Yeah, see ya.